Roger's, relationship with Trump has been so interconnected that it's hard to define what's Roger and what's Donald. While it will be clearly a Trump presidency, I think it's influenced by a Stone philosophy.
Side note, Paul Manafort entered court using a cane to get around today. That was from the documentary Get Me Roger Stone. Manafort's characterization of the Trump-Stone relationship, which again dates back over 40 years. Manafort was close with both men, having not only managed Trump's campaign, but also as a lobbying partner of Roger Stone. Back in the crazy 80s, one of their first clients was Donald Trump. Stone, who is a self-described political dirty trickster, has worked for Bush 41, Ronald Reagan, and as a young man briefly worked for Richard Nixon. Again, he famously tattooed his hero on his back, and who among us can say that? He posed like his hero today. And it was all too much for the Nixon Foundation. They put this out today. This morning's widely circulated characterization of Roger Stone as a Nixon campaign aide or advisor is a gross misstatement. Mr. Stone was 16 years old during the Nixon presidential campaign of '68 and 20 years old during the re-election campaign in '72. Mr. Stone, during his time as a student at GW University, was a junior scheduler on the Nixon re-election committee. Mr. Stone was not a campaign aide or advisor. Nowhere in the presidential daily diaries from '72 to '74 does the name Roger Stone appear. Okay, thank you, Nixon Foundation. Message received. About the current president, as Stone tells it, the loyalty is strong. Let's talk about that tonight. With us, Manuel Roy Franzia, returning to the broadcast features reporter for The Washington Post. Also returning, Carol Leonnig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, also with The Washington Post. Carol, we get it. Thank you, Nixon Foundation, for the unambiguous message. When you look back on this piece in November, I'm about to quote you to you. And a lot of people learned what they know about the relationship when you wrote this November of last year. The calls almost always came deep into the night. Caller ID labeled them unknown, but Roger Stone said he knew to pick up quickly during those harried months of the 2016 presidential campaign. There would be a good chance that the voice on the other end of the line would belong to his decades-long friend, the restless, insomniac candidate Donald Trump, dialing from a blocked phone number. Carol, what else should we know about this relationship?
Well, first of all, I would like to argue and stress that my great colleague Manuel on the other box is really the beautiful writer of that prose, but I was a helpful reporter teamed up with him. And Brian, I just want to flag and give you credit for that intro about the Nixon Foundation. How weird a world is it where Nixon needs to separate himself from Roger Stone? That's how bad. Yeah. That's how bad Roger is. So about the relationship, what I found fascinating about reporting that story with Manuel was the idea that the president and then the candidate was in the middle of the night calling Roger one of the dirtiest tricksters you can find, a person who habitually lies and spins to work his magic to help his candidates and to truly hurt and maim the opponent. He is calling him to confer. And perhaps the most important moment when Donald Trump is talking to Roger Stone is August 3rd. On August 2nd, a man emails Roger and warns him that WikiLeaks is going to be releasing some damaging information about Hillary. The next day, we learned Roger is on the phone with Donald Trump. Both of them want to deny and have indirectly denied that the subject of WikiLeaks ever came up. Do we really think that is logical or possible when it was on the tip of Donald Trump's tongue in late July? He was asking Russia to find the deleted emails. He was curious about the July 22nd dump. It's just those late night calls, and that particular one is to me really interesting.
Okay, Carol, to your fellow superb writer, Manuel, talk about the Trump-Manafort relationship, Manuel, and Stone's role in that.
Oh, well, Trump and Manafort get together specifically because of Roger Stone. Roger Stone knows that as they're entering in the 2016 campaign, the cycle where they're moving towards the convention, that there could potentially be a floor fight at the convention. And he tells Donald Trump, Paul Manafort is the man for you. What I found so interesting about that is that Paul Manafort had been a business partner with Roger Stone back in the 80s. One of their big clients was Donald Trump. But Roger Stone was so tight with Donald Trump in those days and was so involved in that particular part of their business that when he introduced when he introduced Manafort to Trump during the 2016 campaign, he had to reintroduce Manafort. They hadn't been that close back in the 80s, but he connected them in 2016 at that very key moment.
So, Manuel, was today all flash and dazzle? I mean, there have been so many chapters to Roger Stone's life. When I was in local news here in New York for the CBS station in the 80s, he was our straight-up, serious political analyst who got straight up serious questions on politics. Today, it was a man enjoying the spotlight that indictments on 7 counts can bring.
Well, he wasn't only your straight-up guy to ask questions about political stuff back in those days. He was also the straight-up guy for mainstream establishment Republicans. It's hard to reconcile that with the character who we now know as Roger Stone, this flamboyant guy who goes on television, who put the V for victory sign mimicking Richard Nixon on the courthouse steps today. But back then, he was somebody who was working with people like Jack Kemp and Arlen Specter, really the pillars of the Republican Party. And so we've seen this tremendous evolution in him. And it will be interesting to see how this goes forward, because he's somebody who has to knit this old world of the Republican Party that once loved him with this new world of the Republican Party that is the Republican Party of Trump and is very different from the one that he was fostered in and grew up in.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.